There are a few moments in history where they say that everyone remembers exactly where they were when it went down. The attack on Pearl Harbor, the moon landing, September 11th. Was November 5th, 2024 one of those moments? Was it the day that American democracy died? The day that 76 million Americans voted to give up their rights, hand power over to a dictator, and watch the world burn? It's been a few weeks since the election results, and I've seen a lot of liberal and leftist content creators and news outlets grieving, and I understand that many of us are still reeling from the results, the disappointment in our friends and family who voted for Trump. It takes time to process what just happened. Many people's lives will be fundamentally worse as a result of this next administration. And I don't want to downplay for a second just how serious this actually is. But this video isn't about commiseration, wallowing, or rolling over in despair and defeatism. That's exactly what they want you to do. Instead, I want to shine a glimmer of light through this dystopian cancer and show you that we are not helpless. This is 100% reversible, but we need to take massive action. That said, before I tell you how we're going to beat this, we first need to clear up two things. One, just how bad is it exactly? Because on the one hand, it is way worse than most people realize, and on the other hand, a lot of the panic and paranoia that I'm seeing everywhere is being entirely misdirected. And number two, before we plot a corrective course, we need to know exactly how we got here so that we can reverse it and make sure that this doesn't happen again. First, the bad news. For all the people saying, come on, it's not the end of the world, we survived one Trump presidency already, there are a few key reasons why this time is different. In 2016, nobody expected Trump to win. Not even Trump. With no experience in politics, he wasn't remotely ready for the job. It was disorganized chaos from the jump. He didn't have the same cult following who viewed him as their messiah anointed by God, or a team of thousands of dedicated yes-men willing to do his every bidding, whose loyalties lie first and foremost to him, even above their loyalty to America and the US Constitution. In 2016, he didn't have control of the Supreme Court, which he's now stuffed with loyalist justices who have already ruled that the president is essentially above the law. He now has a plan. He has control of the House and Senate, and the few Republican members of Congress willing to risk going against him have almost all been voted out, resigned, or retired. He's promised to make the FBI and DOJ directly accountable to the president, which would prevent them from investigating his crimes and would allow him to weaponize them to target his political opponents and enemies, both in politics and in the press. He plans to use Schedule F to make thousands of independent government employees accountable directly to him, stuffing these roles with MAGA loyalists. And with this newfound power, he aims to erode the separation of church and state, gut the Department of Education.
We should abolish the Department of Education.
Fund religious schools teaching young earth creationist nonsense, pull out again from the Paris Climate Accords, strip trans people of their rights, potentially push for a nationwide abortion ban, or at least make it damn near impossible to get one, and round up and deport immigrants by the trainloads, stripping millions of families and loved ones apart. And there's so much more. I'm not going to go into too much more detail on all of that in this video because we have a lot to get through, and I've covered a lot of this dystopian agenda already in my video on Project 2025, which, by the way, the same Republicans who were adamant that it wasn't Trump's plan and that he had no connection to it are now coming out and admitting post-election that it was actually the plan all along.
Matt Walsh, I think, is a very smart and a funny guy. Just put up on Twitter. Now that the election is over, I think we can finally say that, yeah, actually, Project 2025 is the agenda. That's from Matt Walsh. Fabulous.
Now, before you hang your despairing head in resignation or succumb to the disappointing numbness and shock which I've seen so many people on the left caving to, I want to address several major concerns where I think our fears are being misdirected, and I want to reassure you that this shit ain't over. The number one concern that I've been seeing is the fear that Trump could eliminate voting rights, remove term limits, and turn America into a right-wing authoritarian dictatorship, ruled North Korea style by a never-ending Trump dynasty. And I get it. When a former president starts openly praising fascist dictators and talking about being a day one dictator himself,
He says, you're not going to be a dictator, are you? I said, no, other than day one.
it is deeply concerning. But let's take a step back and look at what is actually possible. Because while Trump absolutely poses very real threats to democracy, and this kind of rhetoric has MAGA sycophants creaming their tactical pants, the system has more safeguards than most people realize. See, Trump may control a slim majority of the House and the Senate. Hell, he can even have a fucking trifecta of Republican power. But in order for him to remove term limits, federalize elections, establish a poll tax to take away votes from poor people, or disenfranchise disenfranchise women, people of color, or other minorities from voting, he would need to amend the fucking Constitution, which requires a 2/3 majority in the House and Senate and ratification by 3/4 of the state legislatures. He's nowhere close to those kinds of numbers. And that's assuming that every single Republican towed the MAGA line. But these initiatives would be massively unpopular and divisive even among Republican lawmakers. Now, that's not to say that Republicans won't try to rig the game in their favor through gerrymandering or attempting to suppress the vote with voter ID laws and other disincentivizing initiatives, specifically targeting Democrat voters. But they've done that shit before, and there are ways to beat it. Oh, and when it comes to revoking birthright citizenship, same story. They just don't have the numbers. The second concern that I see brought up a lot is the fear that Trump will simply seize control of the military and use it to overthrow democracy and get rid of the Constitution altogether. But could Trump really just declare martial law and turn America into Gilead? Sure, plenty of Americans seem hellbent on speedrunning the end of democracy, but the answer is more complicated than either side would have you believe. See, the US government was specifically designed to prevent any wannabe dictator from seizing complete control. Despite what some might think, the US military isn't the president's personal army. US military culture is deeply rooted in nonpartisanship. These are professionals who swear an oath to defend the Constitution, the supreme law of the land. They don't pledge fealty to whoever happens to be sitting in the Oval Office. In fact, they're technically legally bound to disobey unlawful orders, like, say, storming the Capitol or firing upon peaceful civilians. And this isn't just some fine print ceremonial obligation, it is deeply woven into military culture and training. And yes, I am well aware of historical instances like Abu Ghraib, Gitmo, unlawful extraditions, unauthorized surveillance programs, or various other black ops, as evidence that the military can and does follow questionable orders. But there is a vast gulf between small-scale classified operations conducted in the shadows and an overt attempt to overthrow the entire fucking government and constitution. The former couldn't even be successfully hidden without whistleblower exposés and massive media backlash. The latter would require even more widespread cooperation from personnel across all branches of the fucking behemoth that is the US military, by personnel who have spent their entire careers training to prevent exactly this type of situation. Hell, recent reports indicate that the Pentagon is already meeting to create plans in case of just such a scenario. And for those of you saying that Trump can simply remove top-level generals and install his own yes-men, sure, we should be worried, and I get the concern, especially given his track record of trying to weaponize every institution that he touches. But the reality, once again, is far more complex, and thankfully more reassuring than you might think. Because while the president is the commander-in-chief, military generals are not Trump Organization employees who can be fired via tweet. They're commissioned officers whose appointments require Senate confirmation, and removing them involves actual legal procedures under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. There is a long process for that shit, and this isn't just bureaucratic red tape. It is a vital safeguard against exactly this kind of authoritarian overreach, which Americans have feared since the founding of our nation. Even if Trump appoints a MAGA brown-noser as the Secretary of Defense, which he will do, he will still have a massive uphill battle if he wants to turn the military into his personal Gestapo. Yes, the president has significant authority, but Congress holds substantial power over military affairs, including the ability to declare war and control the military's budget. And the president's executive orders can't simply override established laws. And while many Republicans in Congress have learned to toe the MAGA party line in order to keep their jobs, many of them secretly despise Trump. They'll play ball up to a point, but we would only need to flip a few of their votes to prevent loyalist generals from being appointed. And all of this takes time. If the president tries to purge generals for insufficient loyalty, he'll face significant obstacles, legal challenges, congressional oversight, and likely resistance from within the military itself. And even if he succeeds at installing loyalist generals in key positions, they themselves would face massive resistance from the military's decentralized command structure and deeply ingrained professional ethos. But also, where would he get all of these brown-nosing fascist generals from? Trump can't just appoint one of his little civilian crony buddies as a US military general. Generals have to work their way up through the ranks, so his pool of replacement choices is severely limited, which is literally why Trump bemoaned the fact that he couldn't just have generals like Hitler's. We have seen historically that democratic institutions can fail when sufficiently stressed, but America's system of checks and balances wasn't designed on blind faith. It was built by people who understood the dangers of concentrated power. Between legal requirements, congressional oversight, judicial review, press scrutiny, public backlash, backlash, and the military's own institutional safeguards, turning the US military into a personal army would be extremely difficult. The threat to democracy is real, but it's more likely to come through subtle erosion, a death by 1,000 cuts, rather than a dramatic military takeover. What about mass deportation though, which is very much a form of ethnic cleansing? Well, straight from the get-go, Trump's plan to deport millions of immigrants, illegal or not, is extremely unpopular and will face years of challenges, bad press, and legal battles. But there's an even bigger roadblock. The cost to deporting 11 million undocumented immigrants is estimated at between $315 billion and nearly $1 trillion. And it would require building and maintaining detention facilities with 24 times their current capacity. And the US already boasts one of the highest incarceration rates in the world. That kind of scale is astronomically implausible. And bear in mind that despite Trump's best efforts during his last term, Congress was only willing to appropriate about $5.8 billion to Trump's border wall. He literally had to declare a national state of emergency in order to redirect $10 billion from the DoD's budget, and even some of that was struck down in court. He barely made a dent in his failed wall project, and this would be exponentially more expensive than that. Trump has extremely ambitious goals for the next 4 years, and as I've already stated, many of his plans will be met with legal challenges at every step of the way. And thanks to the 2020 midterm election results, Biden has been able to absolutely pack the courts, with 221 Article 3 judges having been already confirmed by the Senate, and another 22 awaiting confirmation. And while Trump talks a big talk, with statements about a 60% tariff on Chinese imports and a 20% blanket tariff on imports from everywhere else, as well as getting rid of the FDA and cutting 75% of the federal workforce, what do you think that's going to do to the economy? If you think that the price of eggs is bad,
Boy, are you in for a big surprise.
so either one of two things is going to happen. Either he's going to quietly walk back some of these utterly idiotic plans, or he goes full speed ahead, the economy absolutely tanks, and he loses backing from investors and his billionaire supporters, as well as the general public. Basically, as much as Republicans love to tout the free market, surprisingly enough, this is one area where capitalism will either severely constrain him or absolutely tank his support. And the whole thing about cutting 75% of the government, that's something that Congress controls, not the executive branch. And speaking of those pesky free market forces being a check on Trump's actions, let's talk about his desire to repeal Section 230. You know, the legislation that protects social media companies like YouTube, Instagram, and X from being sued into oblivion over shit that you as a user posts on them. If he were to gut it, you would see a significant increase in censorship as to what you can and can't post. But he already tried to gut it in his first term when he had loyalists throughout government, and he still couldn't pull it off. Why? Because Section 230 has strong bipartisan support, particularly because scrapping it would devastate right-wing influencers just as much as liberal ones. Ben Shapiro, PragerU, Joe Rogan, all of these new media voices which the Republican Party relies on would suddenly find themselves without a platform. And here's where market forces once again actually help to protect free speech. These tech platforms might all have some bias as to what they promote, but completely purging one political party from a platform would be devastating to business. Tech giants like Google, Meta, and even X don't want entirely partisan echo chambers. They want engagement and debate because that's what drives profit. The moment that authoritarianism threatens their bottom line, you damn well better believe that they'll fight it. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure as hell rhymes. And for those of you who remember the Bush presidency in 2004, he was riding high on post-9/11 nationalism, expanding executive power like John Hagee's Beltline. The Patriot Act, Gitmo, government surveillance programs, and illegal extraditions, there was widespread fear that America was sliding headfirst into fascism. Not to mention the full-scale attack on gay rights. People got their news from Fox, televangelists, and conservative talk radio, but liberals pushed back. We flipped the narrative, and in 2006, Democrats gained control of Congress and proceeded to block many of Bush's initiatives. And 2 years later, Obama was sworn into office. Don't get me wrong, things are bad, really bad, but there will absolutely be a 2026 midterm election. And as long as we don't roll over in despair and throw in the towel, then when it comes, we absolutely can flip this. Take back the House and the Senate, and then flip the executive branch in 2028 as well. But in order to successfully pull this off, we need to understand why Trump won to begin with. I've seen a lot of people on the left post memes and statements implying that Americans voted in a dictator simply to save 50 cents on the price of eggs, or that 76 million Americans are racist, including the 10 million Black and Hispanic Trump voters, or that America is sexist and not ready for a woman president, despite just under half of all women voting for Trump. And while some of that is true, and I'm not going to tell you that racism and misogyny don't exist in America, or that they're not serious problems. Hell, Trump himself has said some of the most racist, sexist, and bigoted things of any president. But if you want to win the next election, demonizing all men or all white people as the enemy isn't exactly a winning strategy. You're not only missing the big picture, but you're going to alienate some of the biggest fucking voting blocs in the US. And more importantly, there's a much bigger reason as to why Trump won. I want to show you one chart that will fundamentally change how you view the results of this election. White evangelical Christians make up 27% of voters. That is over 41 million voters and is one of the largest voting demographics. And guess what? 82% of them voted for Trump. If you take away this one demographic, then the election results flip dramatically, with 57% of remaining voters voting for Kamala and barely 40% supporting Donald Trump. If you've ever lived in the Deep South, it makes perfect sense. The influence of religion and the church is everywhere. Faith healers pack out arenas, pastors write best-selling books, and televangelists reach millions of people. Kenneth Copeland alone makes over $100 million a year. A year! They are propaganda machines with nearly bottomless budgets. They pay no taxes and dump millions into promoting political candidates. And for the last 8 years, they have turned Trump into an American messiah and painted Democrats as satanic baby killers. Just before the election, I was talking to my parents about Trump. For full context, they have a Mexican son-in-law, an Asian daughter-in-law, and most of their closest friends are Middle Eastern because they spent the last 30 years in Azerbaijan. They hated that Trump was the Republican candidate, and they despise the fact that Trump is an immoral, adulterous, sexist felon with a history of rape and sexual assault. And they were well aware of his dictatorial ambitions and even acknowledged that he posed a very real threat to the future of democracy. But despite acknowledging all of this, with the very same breath, my mom told me that I wouldn't understand, but to her, she just couldn't vote for anyone who supported abortion, because to her, that is tantamount to genocide. A fundamentally ignorant view as to what abortion actually is. And because her belief in heaven is so firmly ingrained in her, she views this life as a simple test, a trial run in preparation for the one to come. The kingdoms of this earth don't last forever anyways, so she would rather watch this world burn in exchange for a heavenly reward for doing the right thing. Make no mistake, Trump's path to victory ran through the churches. But here's the good news. People can and do change their religious beliefs. Back in the 1990s, over 90% of Americans were Christian. Now, that number is down to 63%. The percentage of non-religious Americans has been steadily climbing and has consistently been the fastest growing demographic in the US. And it's highest among the younger generations, like millennials and Gen Z. It is a snowball, but the remaining religious voters are becoming more extreme because they're losing ground, and they're getting more desperate. We have the truth. They have Kent fucking Hovind and Answers in Genesis bullshit, which is why they're attacking education, why they're spending billions to spread misinformation. They're fighting for voucher programs for religious schools and attempting to erode trust in universities and higher education. This is deliberate strategy. Now is not the time to roll over in despair and play dead. We need more voices, more content creators. Get out there and get your voice heard. There are dozens of platforms that you can get active on and get your voice out there with. This is exactly why I have been fighting against religious extremism and Christian nationalism from day one when I started my channel 9 years ago. And it's why I will continue to battle it until this fight is won. Don't get me wrong, this shit is not easy. We are David against Goliath. They have TV shows, radio programs, entire production and marketing teams, gigantic platforms, and billions of dollars in funding. And they are extremely well connected. Meanwhile, most of us are grassroots. I started with zero connections, no money, no followers, no fancy equipment. Hell, I was recording audio in my fucking car, which doubled as a home while I traveled the country to network with people at conferences. And I still managed to reach almost 40 million people on YouTube alone. I gathered a community of YouTubers to collaborate and push back. I helped train and coach new content creators and expand their reach. And I organized a conference to help inspire the next generation of content creators. In that time, we saw an explosion of secular content creators, atheist YouTubers, TikTokers, Instagrammers, people talking about deconstruction, science communicators, and it's only going to grow. This is a grassroots countercultural movement movement. But we have passion, truth, and motherfucking grit. If I was able to do all of those things with bare bones funding, imagine what we can accomplish if we scale this shit. If we want any chance of blocking Trump's Christian nationalist initiatives, we have to win in 2026. We have less than 2 years to pull this off. And to do that, we need to ramp this up, and we need funding. I'm not just saying this for my channel. Hell, if you hate me, that is fine. There are loads of excellent atheist content creators fighting this fight. Forrest Falkai, Rationality Rules, Eve Was Framed, Alex O'Connor, just to name a few. But if you do like my style, or my videos have helped you in any way and you want to help me expand this, right now I am planning to scale up Holy Kool-Aid substantially. At the start of 2025, I am teaming up with another atheist YouTuber, Stephen Woodford, and the plan is to pool our resources, rent out a large studio space in the UK, hire a team, and massively increase our output, so that when Tucker Carlson drops some bullshit about demons,
People are attacked in their bed by demons.
or John Hagee or Ben Shapiro spout some bullshit about Judeo-Christian values,
Judeo-Christian values.
we can respond the very next day with a brutal bitch slap, showing the world how utterly moronic these clowns are. In the past, I have focused heavily on religion, and I have entire series on my channel focused on faith healing fraud, prophecy fails, religious nonsense of all stripes. That is not changing. I just plan to scale it up. I'm gonna continue this line of attack because it works. And by partnering with Steve, building out a new studio, hiring a team, and tapping into new tools at our disposal, there is no limit as to what we can pull off. I know how evangelicals think, because I used to be one of them, and I hate the shit that these fuckers are doing to my country. So I am thirsty for this fight. But to pull this off, I need your help. Up until this point, AdSense and Patreon have kept my show going, and I am extremely grateful to everyone who has supported me this far. But in order to scale this, we need something bigger. So I've put together a GoFundMe with various tiers to make this a reality. If we raise $10,000, that will help get me to the UK and self-sponsor my visa to stay and work full-time. If we raise an additional 20 grand, that will pay for my half of the studio rent for the first year. The next 42,000 will go towards hiring and training a full-time editor. But let's not stop there. I need full-time marketers, copywriters, graphic designers, researchers, team managers, equipment upgrades, and more. And while maintaining and growing a team will require a steady flow of funding, if we can get this initial boost, as the channel grows, we will see an increase in ad revenue, Patreon support, and sponsorship deals to cover the costs. So I've put a link to the GoFundMe in the description below. Whatever you can give goes a long way, because unlike the religious right, we don't have billionaire donors. But what we do have is a lot of passionate people who aren't about to give up and who want to contribute towards making positive change. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me to the end of the video, for your ongoing support. If you're able to smash that like button before you go, that would be awesome. This isn't going to be easy, but this fight is ours for the taking, and together I think we can pull this off. As always, dare to be curious, but don't drink the Kool-Aid.